Do you like spring-inspired polymer clay pieces? Do you like faux ceramic effects for your polymer clay designs? Well, if you answer yes to these questions, I invite you to watch the tutorial and get inspired to create more using polymer clay. Hi, I'm Mihaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and let's dive in. I'm working with white polymer clay that I have previously conditioned, and I passed the polymer clay through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine. And in fact, I prepared 2 blocks, and I'm going to use one sheet of polymer clay to make the back of the piece, and the other I'm going to use it to make the front. So let's start by texturing the clay. And we are going to use this sheet of textured polymer clay to make the back of the, let's say, pendant. So I'm using a daffodil stamp and an acrylic block to press the stamp into the clay. And I'm just using this stamp to make a beautiful daffodil texture pattern. And then I will just flip this sheet of polymer clay, and so I will put this to the side and use it later to make the back of the piece. And now I am going to use the second sheet of polymer clay passed through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine. And I'm going to cover this sheet of polymer clay with imitation gold metal leaf. And because my clay is raw, I only had to put the imitation metal leaf on top of the clay, and then I used my fingers to burnish the leaf into the clay. You will notice that I used a lot of leaf, and then I started to wipe off some of the leaf because I wasn't really sure how much of the leaf I am going to keep in the final design. I decorated the entire sheet of polymer clay with metal leaf, but of course, if you want to have more white polymer clay showing through in the final design, and if you don't want to wipe it out with sanding paper, you could only decorate those areas that you intend to texture with the stamp. So I've decorated the polymer clay with the imitation gold metal leaf, and then I used sanding paper and I started to lightly sand the imitation metal leaf in the areas where I don't want so much metal leaf, so I'm going to keep it in some areas for an interesting effect. And then I've just used sanding paper and I roughly sanded off the metal leaf in some areas, especially on top of the daffodil. And because I still have clay decorated with metal leaf, I decided to use the smallest size of Etch'n'Pearl and make the dotted pearls. And I applied them next to a petal of the daffodil. And in fact, in order to use the Etch'n'Pearl, you'll just have to press it gently into the clay decorated with imitation gold metal leaf, and then you'll have to turn it right and turn it to the other side. And then in order to get the pearl out of the tool, you'll just have to gently press it into raw clay, and then again move the Etch'n'Pearl to the right and to the left until the pearl which is inside the Etch'n'Pearl tool will stick to to raw clay. And I've used also the largest size of the Etch'n'Pearl, and I've made a larger pearl decorated with imitation metal gold leaf, and then I use the dotting tool to press it and have an interesting center for the daffodil flower. And then for the spring inspired look, I'm going to use light yellow mica powder. So I'm using light yellow mica powder to color the petals of the daffodil, and I'm using a brush, and I'm trying to color the areas in between the embossed so I'm trying to color the embossed white areas, and I'm doing my best not to apply mica powder on top of the decorative metal leaf areas, the veins of the flower, let's say. And then I'm just going to use orange mica powder to color the area in between the center of the flower and the petals. And I'm using a fine brush to color these areas. And you'll notice that I did not apply the stamps so that I would have the entire flower, because I intend to cut this design with a daffodil flower, part of a daffodil flower on one side, and I also wanted to have a larger white area around the flower, maybe with a little bit of sanded off gold metallic imitation leaf. So I invite you to subscribe to Learn Polymer Clay if you're not already subscribed. And so I took the textured clay that I prepared for making the back of the piece, and then I put the clay decorated with decorated with the imitation metal leaf and colored with mica powders on top. And then I've used parchment paper to press everything together lightly. I don't want to distort the design, but I want to make sure that these two sheets of polymer clay are well connected. And this is the cutter that I intend to use to cut out the shape, and I particularly like this cutter for making faux ceramic pieces. Now I just need to decide how I am going to cut out my clay design. And after using cutters to cut out your design, you should smooth off the edges. You can use your fingers, you can use dotting tools, you can use the back of your craft knife. And I've also used baby wipes to wipe off the imitation metal leaf in some areas. And then I decided to remove even more, and because I wanted to have a white area that would really enhance the faux ceramic look. Like I wanted this piece to look like piece cut out of a ceramic flower plate. And so I wanted to have the white area to give the impression of having like a piece cut out of a flower plate. And I wanted also the flower to be and I also cut out parts of the flower for this faux ceramic effect, because when you have a plate that breaks, you won't have the entire flower, you will only have parts of it. I somehow felt that flower design was a little bit too flat, so I decided to add a little bit of yellow mica powders on top of the decorative area colored with orange mica powder, and I added even more orange mica powder in some areas. And then when you are happy with the look of your piece, you can put it in the oven. I baked my pieces for 40 minutes in the preheated oven, and I baked them on parchment paper. I also tint my pieces, meaning I'm putting an aluminum disposable pan or a cardboard board on top to protect my pieces from direct heat, especially for white polymer clay pieces or light colors of polymer clay. And then I let the clay cool down, and then I felt that the piece did not have the vibrant colors that I wanted it to have. So I decided to mix a little bit of UV resin with some orange mica powder, and I'm using a brush to apply this colored resin to color even more areas of the flower. And of course I've used some UV resin and yellow mica powder to enhance the yellow colored parts of the daffodil. Now, if you think that the resin will anyway make these colors pop up, you might totally skip this step, but I really wanted to make sure that I have beautiful vibrant colors for this piece, so I said I'll add another coat of color to make sure. And then I've cured the resin for 1 minute. I'm using a very fast curing UV lamp, and now I can add a generous layer of UV resin, and when the UV resin cures, you'll have a very beautiful shiny look. And I thought this would be the perfect look for a ceramic inspired polymer clay design. So I'm pouring a generous amount of UV resin on top of the piece. Of course, I've used gloves to protect my hands. You will also have to work in well ventilated areas and use rubbing alcohol to clean your brushes and your tools when using resin. After applying a certain amount of resin, I will let the resin sit for 1-2 minutes. Then you'll just have to use your heat gun or a torch, if you have any, to remove any air bubbles. And then you can use again the UV lamp and cure the resin. Because I'm working with a fast curing UV lamp, I've only had to cure the resin for 2 consecutive minutes. And I also invite you to stay tuned for more inspiration for work with polymer clay, and I thank you for watching the tutorial and for sharing your impressions with me.